The persecution of women for witchcraft sounds like the kind of backwards stuff that belongs in colonial Salem or 1600s Europe, not something that could happen in modern America, yet in the 1970s, rumors swirled that a high school teacher in a conservative suburb of Tucson, Arizona was a witch. Although tenured tenure did not keep her from getting fired for witchcraft. Below are 20 things about that and other fascinating witchcraft facts from history. A presentation about witchcraft with far-reaching consequences. In the fall of 1969, high school social studies teacher invited a University of Arizona expert on witchcraft and folklore to give a speech to upperclassmen. The speaker, Dr. Bird Granger, addressed students of Flowing Wells High School in Tucson, Arizona, and gave a presentation about the common traits of witches. According to Dr. Granger, witches like to wear devil's green, have green or blue eyes, blonde hair, a pointed left ear with a node, and a widow's peak, a V-shaped point in the hairline in the center of a forehead. It did not take long before head swiveled towards Ann Stewart, a Flowing Wells English teacher who had all of those attributes. Few could have predicted the brouhaha that would ensue from that speech. Rumors of a witch teacher. After the witchcraft presentation, Flowing Wells High School students began to tease English teacher Ann Stewart about whether or not she was a witch. Mrs. Stewart saw an opportunity to enhance the kids' interest in literature and folklore. As she described it later, "I like to get kids involved. I teach American literature, among other things. Although I've never had a unit in the occult, we do delve into early American folklore and witchcraft. It was good fun and it stimulated them." So she played along with the banter. She never said she was a witch, but whenever students asked if she was one, she did not deny it, but replied with a variant of, "Well, I have all the signs." What do you think? What they and the school administration thought would get her fired. Witchcraft humor flew over many heads in Flowing Wells, Arizona. In 1970, to heighten her students' interest in literature, Ann Stewart suggested that they find out what astrology is all about. That further enhanced the rumors about her involvement with the occult. Later that year, a junior high school teacher invited her to speak before her 8th graders about folklore and witchcraft. As part of the presentation, Mrs. Stewart dressed up and played the part of a witch. When those 8th graders arrived in Flowing Wells High School that fall, many of them fueled the rumors that Mrs. Stewart really was a witch. The English teacher thought it was all good fun, but Flowing Wells was a particularly conservative community. Many students, their parents, and faculty members at the high school did not get the joke. A teacher fired in 1970s America for witchcraft. On November 27, 1970, Ann Stewart was suspended for teaching about witchcraft, having stated that you are a witch in a way that affects students psychologically. She was also accused of insubordination, discussing subjects beyond the curriculum, being a bad influence on students, and aggravating other teachers. The suspension of an American teacher in 1970 for witchcraft became international news. In conservative Flowing Wells, Stewart became a pariah, shunned by neighbors and former friends. She appealed to the school board, but it confirmed the decision to fire her, so she sued in court and there won on grounds that the board had violated the legal procedures for dismissing a tenured teacher like Stewart. The court ordered her reinstatement, but as of February 1972, she had not returned to her job, and it is unclear if she ever taught at Flowing Wells again. Piety and mental instability combined in this headmistress. Antoinette Bourignon was a pious but mentally unstable 17th-century Frenchwoman who founded an all-girls boarding school in Lille, France. One day in 1639, when she entered the classroom, Madame Bourignon imagined that she saw a swarm of little black imps flying around the heads of the schoolgirls. Alarmed at the apparitions, she told the children to beware the devil, whose little black demons were buzzing all around them. Bourignon became obsessed with the little black imps that hovered around her wards' heads and warned the schoolgirls every day to watch out for the devil. Soon the impressionable children came to believe that there were, indeed, little black demons flying all around them. Before long, Satan's satanic possession, demons, witches, and witchcraft became almost the sole topic of conversation in the school. A Me Too frenzy of witchcraft confessions swept this school. A schoolgirl ran away too scared to stay in an establishment infested with little black devils, who might possess her at any moment, as the headmistress and her staff constantly warned the students. When brought back, she claimed not to have run away, but to have been carried away by the devil. Also that she was a witch who had practiced witchcraft since she was 7 years old. When they heard that, About 50 other schoolgirls began to have fits. When they came to, they joined in a Me Too rush, and claimed to be witches as well. In their clamor to confess, the children competed to outdo each other with the details of their witchcraft. Some claimed to ride on broomsticks. They were topped by others who claimed an ability to pass through keyholes. Those were trumped in turn by those who claimed to have feasted on the flesh of babies, or to have attended the Dome Daniel, the gathering of the demons. A horrific tragedy avoided at the last moment. The authorities launched a formal investigation, although some legal clergy and citizens were skeptical. Most believed that the children's confessions of witchcraft were valid. It thus followed that all 50 schoolgirls should be burned at the stake as witches to make an example of them. The little girls' lives were only spared at the last minute, after some skeptical priests, aghast at what was about to happen, insisted that the investigators dig in deeper. That was when they finally discovered what the school's headmistress had done. To fill the girls' heads with thoughts of demonic possession, the children were absolved, and the blame shifted to Madame Bourignon. She barely escaped punishment after the authorities, unsure of her sanity and tired of the whole affair, wound down and closed the investigation. Nutt, who thought witchcraft and demons were all around her. Margareta Peter was born into a large Swiss family around 1794, and from an early age, displayed remarkable religious zeal. By age 6, she was a prodigy as a preacher and captivated congregations with impassioned sermons. She revealed a better grasp of the Bible than many grown ministers. She had a strong personality, and spiritually dominated her family and neighbors and turned them into her disciples. At age 20, Margareta announced that she was a prophetess and started a small congregation in her village. She also began to wander the region and preach, and gained a reputation and followers across Switzerland. In 1823, Margareta began to harp on Satan, demons, witchcraft, and warn her flock that such fell darkness was all around them. Soon she began to experience prophetic visions in which demons took over the world. A deluded prophetess takes a stand against darkness. Margareta Peter eventually decided to act, lest the world succumbs to demons and witchcraft. One day she told 10 devoted followers to gather weapons and pray, because the final battle between Satan and Jesus was about to begin. On her instructions, they gathered axes and clubs and whatever weapons they could find, and barricaded themselves in a farmhouse attic. She told them that invisible demons had surrounded the house, and then she shrieked that they had broken in. At that point, the disturbed prophetess' disturbed followers began to wildly swing their weapons at imaginary devils and creatures of darkness only she could see. That went on for hours, in which time the group destroyed the attic in a religious frenzy. It got worse when Margareta and her followers eventually left the wrecked attic and descended to the ground floor. Pain to ward off demons, Satan, and witchcraft. On the ground floor, Margareta Peter and her followers began to hit each other, on the theory that pain would ward off the demons, satanic forces and witchcraft all around them. They kept at it until the neighbors finally called the police. They arrived to find Margareta's followers senseless on the floor, while she continued to beat them. The next day she told her congregation that more pain was needed to fend off Satan. She then grabbed an iron wedge and began to bludgeon her brother, while her followers went back to beating each other up. Margareta then announced that her dead mother's ghost ordered her to sacrifice herself. Her sister stepped up and insisted that she be sacrificed instead. Margareta accepted and began to bash her sister with the iron wedge. The rest of the congregation joined in, and soon, the sister was dead. When a follower protested, Margareta assured her that her sister would rise from the dead in 3 days. An ultimate sacrifice to save the world? After she killed her sister, Margareta Peter ordered her followers to crucify her. They were reluctant at first, but she insisted that it was necessary to combat Satan, demons and witchcraft. She also assured them that she would return to life in 3 days. So they made a cross, and as the prophetess urged them on, they nailed her to it by her hands, elbows, feet and breasts. She then ordered them to stab her through the heart. They tried but couldn't get it right. So after multiple failed attempts, they took a hammer and crowbar and smashed her head. Then the congregation gathered around the bodies and prayed while they waited for the corpses to come back to life in 3 days. Needless to say, 3 days came and went, but the deceased Margareta and her equally lifeless sister stayed that way. Her disciples were tried for murder, and 11 were convicted and given prison sentences ranging from 6 months to 16 years. History's most infamous witchcraft craze. The Salem witchcraft craze of 1692-1693 is probably history's most famous or infamous case of mass hysteria. It took place against a cultural and religious background that was predisposed to believe in the supernatural. While witchcraft is laughable to most today, in 17th century colonial America, and especially in Salem and the Massachusetts Bay Colony, it was taken quite seriously. The belief that Satan could grant witches extraordinary powers in return for their loyalty, and that witchcraft could be used to inflict harm on the good and godly, was taken for granted. The tragedy began in January 1692, when the 9-year-old daughter and 11-year-old niece of Salem's reverend began to have screaming fits. As they shrieked, the girls contorted themselves into unnatural positions, threw things and made weird noises. The start of an avalanche of crazy accusations. A local doctor found no signs of physical ailment to explain the girls' behavior, so he blamed it on the supernatural. Soon another young girl aged 11 began to exhibit similar symptoms. Examined by magistrates, the girls alleged that 3 women had used witchcraft against them. The accused were the Reverend's black slave Tituba, an elderly impoverished woman named Sarah Osborne, and a homeless beggar named Sarah Good. Osborne and Good protested their innocence, but for whatever reason, perhaps torture or perhaps a promise of leniency, Tituba confessed to having been visited by the devil. She described him as a black man who asked her to sign a book. Tituba admitted that she had signed, then went on to point the finger at other witches. The spread of mass hysteria about witchcraft. Tituba's confession triggered mass hysteria, and in subsequent months, a flood of accusations poured in. The more far-fetched they were, the more they solidified the populace's belief in the potency of witchcraft and enhanced the panic. When the godly and regular churchgoer Martha Corey was accused of witchcraft, it did not give the good people of Salem pause. Instead, it reinforced their fears. If solid citizen Martha Corey could be a witch, then anybody could be a witch. On May 27, 1692, the colony's governor ordered the establishment of a special court to try the accused. Its first victim was Bridget Bishop, an older woman known as a gossip and with a reputation for promiscuity. Her protestations of innocence did her no good. She was convicted, sentenced to death, and hanged on June 10 in what became known as Gallows Hill. Dreams as evidence. 5 more innocents were convicted of witchcraft and hanged in July 1692, another 5 in August, and 8 more that September. The trials were marked by a lack of due process and the use of spectral evidence. It was basically testimony by witnesses that they dreamt or had a vision that the spirit or specter of the accused which did them harm. An accuser's dream or vision that Jane Doe bit, hid and punched me was admissible evidence in court that Jane Doe had actually bit, hid and punched the accuser. It made no difference if the unfortunate Doe was nowhere near the accuser that day, her specter was. Respected theologian and Reverend Cotton Mather wrote the court to caution against the use of spectral evidence, but he was ignored. Baseless accusations of witchcraft threatened to engulf an entire colony. The accusations of witchcraft spread like ripples from Salem, until they threatened to engulf all of colonial Massachusetts. The governor finally ended the trials and their ever-expanding circle of accusations, when his own wife was accused of being a witch. By then 200 people had been accused of witchcraft, and 20 had already been hanged. Eventually, the authorities admitted that the trials had been a mistake, and compensated the families of the wrongly convicted witch hunt victims. The Salem witchcraft mass hysteria and resultant trials became synonymous with paranoia and injustice. They stand today as a cautionary tale about the dangers of religious extremism, false accusations, and the lack of due process. Medieval convents were pressure cookers. Before the modern era, many outbreaks of mass hysteria occurred within religious institutions. Convents in particular were prime grounds, ripe for eruptions of contagious mass delusion. That was because convents, especially in the Middle Ages, contained large numbers of nuns who had been forced into them by their families. Once in, they were compelled to lead lives that many found disagreeable. Inside the convents, many of the unfortunate girls or women forced to don the habit and become nuns were confined in prison-like conditions. As seen below, they led a stressful lifestyle that was often not one they had freely chosen. Disobedient medieval nuns could be burned at the stake for witchcraft. Among other things, medieval nuns were expected to be celibate and submit to poverty and hard work. They were expected to unquestioningly obey authority figures, who had the right to compel compliance with coercive measures. Those ranged from the imposition of extra labor to confinement in cells, to the deprivation of food and water. Physical chastisement and punishment were also available. They ranged from whipping and caning in-house, to turning over the most defiant nuns to ecclesiastic courts. There, if things went particularly bad, a hard-headed nun could end up burned to death for witchcraft, or demonic possession. Such conditions of communal long-standing stress and fear are textbook causes for the outbreak of mass hysteria. It is thus not surprising that nunneries frequently experienced eruptions of mass delusions. Collective meowing and witchcraft. The pressure cooker of medieval convents led to a bizarre collective craze of mass meowing. One day a nun started to meow like a cat. Back then cats were not viewed by Europeans as cute and cuddly pets, but as creatures associated with Satan, witches, and witchcraft. Soon other nuns joined in and started to meow. Before long the whole convent was meowing. It eventually became chorus-like, as all the nuns joined in collective caterwauling for several hours each day. Understandably, the cacophony alarmed and upset the neighbors, particularly in light of cats' association with the devil, and demonic possession and witchcraft. Pleas to stop were not heeded, so soldiers were eventually called and ordered to whip the meowing sisters into silence. That finally brought the mass hysteria outbreak to an end. The conman who profited from witchcraft fears. History is full of conmen, but few are more sinister and terrible than Matthew Hopkins. In 1644, amidst the chaos of the English Civil War, he claimed to be England's official witch-finder general, a title and office that did not exist. He then traveled around, mostly in East Anglia, to offer his services for a fee to local governments to root out witches. Fears of witchcraft and sorcery were rife at the time, so Hopkins found plenty of employers who paid him handsomely. It would be funny if not for the fact that Hopkins got scores of innocents killed based on evidence that he had manufactured. He was active for only 2 years, but in that brief span he got over 100 people executed.